Los Angeles, 1969. Flashbulbs exploding, reporters shouting over each other. When one journalist asked Elvis Presley about his never-ending list of women, the room laughed, until Elvis didn't. What he said next wasn't a joke. It was a confession so raw it stopped the cameras mid-roll and left the entire studio silent. June 28, 1969, NBC Studios, Los Angeles. The air buzzed with heat and ego. Photographers shouted. Boom mics hovered like vultures. The king of rock and roll was back. Leaner, sharper, wrapped in a jet-black suit that glimmered under the studio lights. It was supposed to be a celebration. His comeback special had just saved his career. The label called it the return of the king. But Elvis wasn't smiling the way he used to. Behind every grin sat a kind of weariness, the weight of being watched. More than 200 reporters packed the press room. Some were old pros. Others were tabloid hunters looking for blood. They wanted gossip, not gratitude. Elvis sat down behind the microphone. A faint buzz filled the air as the cameras rolled. His voice, smooth as honey, broke through the noise. "Evenin', folks. Hope y'all didn't come here just to see my suit." Laughter erupted. But it wasn't friendly laughter. It was sharp, hungry, the kind that feeds off discomfort. A young reporter from Variety, barely 30, leaned forward. Her notepad shook slightly in her hands. "Mr. Presley," she began, "everyone wants to know. Who's the woman behind the smile this time?" The room chuckled again. The question wasn't new, but tonight it felt cruel. Elvis blinked, a slow, deliberate pause. The flashbulbs flared white across his face. He tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "Ma'am," he said, voice calm but heavy. "You really want to know what love looks like?" The crowd went still. For a moment, nobody knew whether to laugh or listen. The question wasn't rhetorical. It was a dare. Elvis leaned into the microphone. His fingers tapped the wooden desk. Slow, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. "You see, people ask me about love like it's a trophy. But love ain't something you collect. It's something that leaves a mark." No one spoke. The studio's overhead light hummed faintly, like static. He smiled, not the movie star smile. A smaller one, sadder. "Y'all want stories, I get it. You preaching, you sewing. But maybe sometimes, maybe you forget we bleed too." A few pens stopped moving. The laughter had turned to silence. The tension wasn't hostile anymore. It was reverent. Elvis looked around the room, eyes soft but steady. "You came for names," he said. "But I came with truth." The words dropped like a stone into water. You could almost hear the ripples spreading through the air. Then, quietly, he added, "Careful what you ask for. Some answers don't fit in your headlines." The flash of a camera captured the moment. Elvis's face half in shadow, half in light. A man deciding whether to reveal or retreat. Could you keep your dignity when the world turns your heart into entertainment? Would you answer or walk away? He leaned closer to the mic. "All right," he said. "You want the story? Let's start with what love really cost me." The crowd straightened, waiting. The real tape whirred softly. And with that, Elvis Presley began dismantling the myth, one truth at a time. The reporter didn't back down. Her confidence grew under the lights. "Come on, Elvis," she said, forcing a laugh. "Who's the lucky lady this time? Or should we say ladies?" The room erupted again. Pens clicked. Cameras flashed. But Elvis didn't move. The grin that had sold millions of records vanished. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, both hands gripping the microphone. "Ma'am," he said softly, "let me tell you something. Love ain't a lottery." The laughter died instantly. You could almost hear the reel tape spin in the silence. He continued, his drawl slower now, deliberate. "Every time I smile, y'all think there's a new name behind it. Maybe that says more about this business than it does about me." Flashbulbs popped again, catching the sharp lines of his jaw, the tiny muscle twitch in his cheek. The reporters weren't laughing anymore. They were listening. "Seems like every time I write a love song," he said, "folks think it's about someone new. Maybe I just write because I remember what losing love feels like. A few reporters lowered their cameras. They hadn't come for confessions. But that's what they were getting. He took a sip of water, voice steady but softer. Y'all think because I sing about heartbreak, I don't feel it. But I bleed same as anybody else. The room shifted again. No sound, no laughter, just the faint hum of air conditioning. Even the camera crew froze. He looked straight into the lens of the nearest camera. "You want a story?" he said. "Here's one." The lights glared against the sweat on his forehead. "I've spent half my life singing about love, trying to figure it out myself. Every woman I ever cared for got turned into a rumor before I could even say her name." A few reporters exchanged uneasy glances. They'd all written those rumors. Elvis leaned closer, voice almost a whisper. "You print your stories. Then I walk out and live inside 'em. You ever tried living inside somebody else's idea of who you are?" No one answered. He smiled faintly, not bitter, just tired. "It's a strange thing when the world thinks they know your heart better than you do." Someone in the back murmured, "He's actually answering it." Elvis didn't look up. "You want to know what it's like?" he asked. "It's like singing to a crowd that's already decided what the song means before you open your mouth." The words landed hard. The air felt heavier now. He rubbed his temples. "Every person I ever loved," he said quietly, "had to share me with the noise. The noise never sleeps. It don't care if you're tired. It don't care if you're breaking. It just keeps a skin for more." Then he looked at the reporter again. "That's what your question really means, right? You don't want to know who I love. You want to know who's left." A ripple ran through the room. The sentence hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore. The young reporter lowered her notepad. She didn't speak again. Why are we so eager to turn real love into gossip? How much truth do we deserve from someone else's heart? Elvis leaned back, his face calm again. "Don't worry," he said softly. "You'll get your headline. But it ain't gonna be the one you came for." He exhaled slowly, eyes fixed on the flashing red camera light. "Because this time," he whispered, "I'm gonna tell the truth." The crew exchanged glances. Nobody dared move. And then he said the words that would change everything, words he'd never shared with the public before. The silence stretched long enough to make the lights feel hotter. Then Elvis spoke again, voice low, each word measured. "Let me tell you something I ain't told before." The reporters straightened, pens poised. He looked down, twisting the silver ring on his finger. "Back in 1956, he said, "before all the fame, before the gold records, I met a girl in Memphis. Name ain't important, but she was the kind that didn't care about the stage lights. She just wanted me to be still for once." He paused, eyes glassy with memory. "I couldn't be still." The sound engineer in the back turned down the levels. Even the hum of the cameras seemed to fade. Elvis leaned closer. "That year I was playing a small theater on Beale Street. Long nights, little sleep. Every headline called me dangerous. But the only thing dangerous was how lonely I was getting." He smiled sadly. "She used to wait outside after every show. One night, she said, 'Elvis, you keep singing like that, but who's singing to you?' I didn't have an answer." The crowd sat frozen. She didn't want fame, didn't want money, just wanted peace. And I didn't know what peace was yet." He laughed under his breath, but it wasn't humor. It was regret. "She left one night without a word. Said she couldn't love a man who only belonged to strangers." He swallowed hard. "I almost quit music that week. Didn't matter if the world was screaming my name. None of it mattered if she couldn't hear me." The words rolled out like confession. "Love don't die in big ways," he said quietly. "It dies in quiet rooms when you're too busy to notice." Even the flashbulbs stopped. The room was motionless. Just the faint whir of film reels capturing every syllable. Elvis looked up again. "You ever notice," he asked, "how heartbreak don't really end? It just changes shape. Turns into songs. Turns into long drives at night. Turns into silence you pretend not to hear." His voice cracked slightly on that last line. Reporters who'd come looking for gossip now stared like witnesses to something sacred. He continued, "Sometimes I think I sing better when I'm hurt. Not 'cause I like pain, but 'cause pain's the only thing that still feels honest." He exhaled, long and heavy. "That girl. She wrote me one letter years later. Said she found someone good. Someone calm. She said she hoped I'd do the same." He smiled faintly. "Guess I never did." The crowd stayed silent. Not a single question. Just eyes fixed on him. This man who once seemed untouchable, now speaking like a friend across a kitchen table. Elvis rubbed his palms together. "You folks ask why I sing so many sad songs. Truth is, I ain't trying to make people cry. I'm trying to let 'em know they ain't crying alone." He leaned forward again, lowering his voice. "You ever sit in a full room and feel completely by yourself? That's what fame is. It's applause instead of understanding." The sentence hung there, fragile but powerful. Even the cameramen glanced at each other, wondering if they should keep filming something that suddenly felt too real to record. He sighed deeply. "I thought I could sing my way out of loneliness," he whispered. "Turns out it echoes." No one dared breathe. A journalist in the second row quietly set his pen down. The ink had stopped flowing. Outside the studio, through the glass window, you could see the red sun dipping below the Hollywood Hills. Inside, Elvis Presley sat beneath blinding lights, baring his soul to a room that finally understood him. He rubbed his thumb against the table, the same rhythm he'd used on stage his whole life. "That's your story," he said finally. "Print it if you want. Just make sure it sounds human. Have you ever lost someone not because you stopped loving them, but because you forgot to slow down?" He sat back, eyes distant. "All right," he said quietly. "Let's finish this." And just like that, the man they came to interrogate was now the one holding every soul in the room. The room sat in stunned silence. Not even the sound of camera shutters dared to interrupt. Then a male reporter from the Los Angeles Herald finally spoke, his tone half curious, half awkward. "So are you saying you regret the women?" Elvis looked up slowly, his eyes sharp but calm. "No, sir," he said. "I'm saying I regret the noise." That one line hit harder than a shout. The crowd froze. He leaned closer to the mic. "You all write about who I kiss, not what I give. You count the names, not the nights I pray for the ones I lost." His voice trembled just slightly, but it wasn't weakness. It was truth pushing through. "I loved some of those women," he said. "Love iding hiao, but love ain't loud. It don't make good headlines. Y'all ever notice that?" A few nervous chuckles rippled through the room. He didn't smile. "Love's quiet," he continued. "It shows up when nobody's watching. But that kind don't sell papers." He sat back for a moment, exhaled, and then leaned forward again, lower now, steady. "You call it my love life." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "I call it my heartbreak record. Still playin', still huttin', still human." The sentence dropped like a bomb. The studio lights hummed, and somewhere a camera clicked once. A reflex more than a choice. No one spoke. Even Colonel Parker, standing off stage, couldn't move. Elvis straightened his posture. "People think fame makes you strong," he said softly. "It don't. It just makes your pain louder." His hand brushed the side of the mic, knuckles white. "I ain't blamin' y'all," he said. "You got jobs to do. But maybe, just maybe, you could remember I got a heart under all this rhinestone." The words weren't angry. They were gentle, like someone forgiving people who didn't deserve it yet. He smiled faintly, eyes glassy under the bright lights. "You ever try talking to the whole world and feel like nobody's listening? That's me most nights." The press sat frozen. You could sense they wanted to applaud but didn't know if it was allowed. Then Elvis leaned into the microphone one last time and said quietly, "Y'all don't have to write down what I just said, but if you do, make sure it sounds honest." He stood slowly, pushing back the chair. The legs scraped the floor, the sound echoing like thunder in a church. He adjusted his jacket, looked around and added, "Now, if you'll excuse me, I got nothing left to sell but the truth." He turned toward the door. For a few seconds, nobody breathed. Then the first clap broke the spell. came from the back, one reporter, then another. Within seconds, the entire room was on its feet. It wasn't applause for a star. It was gratitude for a man who dared to be real. Elvis smiled slightly but didn't turn around. He whispered something under his breath, just loud enough for the nearest mic to catch it. Guess love finally got the last word. He walked out, leaving the press standing, cameras flashing against an empty chair. Would you have the courage to stop the world's laughter with one honest sentence? Out in the hallway, Colonel Parker stared at him, stunned. What in the world did you just do? Elvis adjusted his collar, his voice quiet but sure. Told the truth, Colonel. First time in a long time. The crowd inside was still clapping when the studio doors closed behind him. The hallway outside the studio was dim and narrow. The smell of hot stage lights and cigarette smoke followed him like ghosts. Elvis loosened his collar, his reflection flashing briefly in a glass wall. The rhinestones still glittering, even under the fluorescent buzz. Colonel Parker caught up to him, red-faced and nervous. You can't just walk out on a press conference like that, he said. Elvis didn't slow down. They wanted Elvis the headline, he muttered. I gave Elvis the man. The colonel sighed. You gave a sermon, son. Elvis stopped walking. Maybe that's what they needed. Behind them, the muffled roar of the reporters still filled the air. Cameras clicked somewhere in the distance, capturing the aftermath. An empty chair, a spinning microphone, a legend walking away. Elvis turned, his expression calm now. You ever notice, Colonel? He said quietly. People cheer the loudest when you stop pretending? Parker had no answer. Down the hall, Charlie Hodgage waited, a towel draped over his shoulder. He handed Elvis a glass of water. You all right, E? Elvis took a sip, eyes still distant. Better than I been in a long time. He sat on a wooden bench outside Studio C, the neon on-air sign flickering above the door. For a moment he said nothing. Then, softly, guess they finally heard me. Charlie chuckled nervously. Heard you? You just stunned a room full of reporters into silence. I'd say you did more than that. Elvis smiled faintly. You know what's funny, Charlie? I spent years trying to fill rooms with noise. Tonight, silence felt better. He leaned back against the wall. Somewhere behind the studio doors, the reels were still spinning, capturing every second of what had just happened. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small chain with a silver cross, the one his mother had given him years earlier. He ran his thumb across it. Mama used to say, truth don't need a bodyguard. She was right. Charlie sat beside him, quiet. You think they'll twist it? Elvis asked suddenly. Charlie shrugged. They always do. But this time you gave em something real. They can't twist real. Elvis smiled again. That soft kind that didn't reach his eyes but came from peace. Then maybe it was worth it. The hallway lights buzzed overhead. A studio intern peeked around the corner, eyes wide, holding a notepad. Mr. Presley, sir. The reporters are still clapping. Elvis stood slowly, adjusted his jacket, and nodded. Leching. Maybe they're not clappin' for me. Maybe they're clappin' for themselves, for rememberin' what truth sounds like. He turned to Charlie. You comin', partner? Charlie grinned. Always. As they walked down the hall, the sound of applause began to fade behind them, replaced by the steady hum of the tape still rolling. The reel spun endlessly, recording the night the king stopped being a story and became a man again. Why does honesty cost more than any lie we tell? The door closed behind him, and all that remained was silence, real, earned, eternal. By sunrise, every major paper in Los Angeles had the same photograph on the front page. Elvis Presley standing beside a microphone, eyes calm, lips parted mid-sentence. The headline read, The King Speaks, and the room goes silent. Within hours, radio stations began replaying the press conference audio, calling it the NBC Love Conference tape. Fans gathered outside the studio gates hoping to see the man who had somehow turned gossip into gospel. NBC producers, stunned by the global reaction, decided to air portions of the interview nationwide. Viewers tuned in expecting scandal, What they got instead was sincerity. His words spread faster than any record. The line, "You call it my love life, I call it my heartbreak record," became a headline across continents. In London, the Daily Mirror wrote, "Presley turned pain into poetry." In Tokyo, thousands of fans left red roses outside the RCA building with handwritten notes. "Thank you for reminding us that love is sacred." Meanwhile, back in Memphis, a crowd gathered outside Graceland. Many brought guitars and flowers, some holding homemade signs that read, "We hear you, Elvis." Colonel Parker couldn't believe it. "They're calling it your redemption speech," he said, pacing Elvis's living room. Elvis smiled quietly. "Ain't redemption, Colonel. Just truth with a mic." He walked to the piano in the corner, running his fingers over the keys. "Funny, ain't it? I said 12 sentences. They been talking about it for 12 days. Charlie Hodgege laughed. "Guess the king's finally speakin' their language." Elvis pressed one key, a soft, lonely note. "Nah," he said. "I just stopped singing for the crowd and started talking to myself." The bootleg tape continued to circulate. Fans copied it, swapped it, played it on late-night radio. The hiss of the reel and the rawness of his tone made it sound more human than any studio track he'd ever recorded. Letters poured in, thousands of them. One from Chicago read, "My husband left me last year. When you said love don't die loud, I believed you." Another, from a teenage girl in Germany, "You made honesty sound brave." By late 1970, NBC placed a small brass plaque in the hallway outside the same studio where it happened. It read, "Here on June 28, 1969, Elvis Presley silenced gossip with grace." Decades later, that plaque still gleamed beneath a soft overhead light. Visitors said if you stood close enough, you could almost hear faint applause echoing down the hallway. When the world tries to define you, do you fight back or rise above? Elvis's 12 sentences didn't just answer a question. They rewrote his legacy. That night, as he watched the news replay the footage again, he smiled faintly. "They finally stopped listening to rumors," he whispered. "Now they're listening to words." Charlie asked, "So what now?" Elvis chuckled. "Now," he said, "I rest. The truth can sing for itself." Outside, the lights of Hollywood flickered like flashbulbs fading to peace. And the king finally looked content. 50 years later, that moment still echoes like a song that never fades. Grainy black and white footage of the press room circulates online. Elvis sitting under the harsh lights, eyes steady, voice low. Viewers today still pause halfway through, mesmerized by the calm defiance in his words. Archivists call it the Presley pause. It's taught in journalism schools as the day a celebrity turned interrogation into introspection. In one clip, you can hear a camera clicking just after his line, "Love isn't a headline, it's a heartbreak record." The sound feels like a heartbeat, frozen in time. Every generation rediscovers it. Comment sections fill with strangers writing the same thing. He wasn't defending himself. He was defending love. A documentary released in 1994 replayed the moment in slow motion. His lips forming the words, reporters blinking in disbelief. The narrator whispered, "He didn't raise his voice. He raised the standard." At Graceland, tourists still stop at the small display case near the main staircase. Inside sits the silver microphone from that 1969 interview, polished but unaltered. The tag beneath it reads, "NBC Studios, June 28, 1969, where Elvis Presley turned silence into strength." Fans stand quietly there. Some smile, some cry. It's not about fame anymore. It's about truth. Elvis never saw himself as a philosopher. But those 12 words changed how people saw him, not as an idol, but as a man who refused to let gossip write his story. Decades later, musicians, actors, and even reporters quote that line when scandals rise again. It's become more than an answer, it's armor. Because in the end, Elvis didn't destroy a question. He destroyed the need to explain himself. When asked years later what he'd felt that night, Charlie Hodgege once said, "He wasn't angry. He was free. That's the sound you heard, freedom." And maybe that's what made the silence so powerful. It wasn't empty. It was peace. When the applause faded, when the lights cooled, the world saw something rare. A man comfortable in his own truth. Love isn't scandal. It's sacred. When you're cornered by gossip, would you defend yourself? Or your dignity? If the story moved you, share it with someone who still believes in keeping grace when the world demands noise. Elvis didn't fight to be right, he fought to be real. Subscribe for more true legends told through moments of honesty, courage, and silence that still speak louder than fame.